A few years back, during muzzleloader season in the remote woods of North Carolina, I ventured out alone for a late afternoon hunt. The air was crisp, and the fading sun cast a haunting amber glow through the towering pines. My tree stand was perched about 60 yards from a meandering creek that cut through the private property. It was a tranquil, almost serene spot, but as the light dimmed, an uneasy stillness settled over the woods. Around 4:30, a faint sound drifted toward me from upstream. At first, it blended seamlessly with the rustling of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig. But then the sound grew clearer, voices low and muffled. My first instinct was to dismiss it as the wind playing tricks on my ears, but the murmurs were rhythmic, deliberate, and unmistakably human. Moments later, a small kayak emerged from the shadows, gliding silently down the creek. Two men sat inside, their conversation so quiet it barely disturbed the stillness. They seemed out of place, no fishing poles, no camping gear, no supplies of any kind. As they drew closer, their expressions were unreadable, their demeanor unnervingly calm. They finally docked their kayak just below my stand, completely oblivious to my hidden perch above them. I froze, my breath shallow, watching as they stepped out of the kayak and exchanged a few words. Without hesitation, they turned and walked into the woods, vanishing into the thick undergrowth. No flashlights, no backpacks, no signs of preparation for the encroaching darkness. I waited for what felt like an eternity, straining to hear their footsteps, but the forest swallowed them whole. When I finally descended from my stand, I approached the kayak, curiosity overriding caution. Inside there was nothing, just two paddles resting at odd angles, as if abandoned in haste. The scene was unnerving, but I chalked it up to trespassers and left, determined to mention it to the landowner later. The following weekend, my curiosity drew me back to the same spot. To my surprise, the kayak remained exactly where I had found it, now draped in leaves and twigs, as if the forest was trying to reclaim it. Unease gnawed at me, and I messaged the landowner, who promptly organized a search. The police scoured the expansive property, but there was no trace of the men. It was as if they had been swallowed by the wilderness, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions. Weeks turned into months, and the kayak became a grim landmark on my hunts, a silent reminder of the men who had disappeared. But then, something happened that turned my unease into outright fear. Just a few days ago, while scouting the area before dawn, I noticed something unusual, a faint trail of fresh footprints leading from the kayak deeper into the woods. The prints were erratic, as if someone had been wandering aimlessly. They weren't there the last time I had checked, and the sight of them made my skin crawl. Unable to resist, I followed the trail for a short distance, my heart pounding with every step. The prints abruptly ended near a cluster of trees, but there, hanging from a low branch, was something that hadn't been there before, a single, muddy boot swaying gently in the breeze. I turned and left without looking back, the sense of being watched crawling up my spine. I haven't been back since. That kayak, those footprints, and now the boot. They all seem to whisper one chilling question I can't answer. Who or what is still out there? One crisp autumn morning, I set out for a hunt well before dawn. The air was biting, the kind of cold that clings to your breath and makes every sound sharper. The forest, veiled in darkness, was unnervingly still as I navigated toward my stand. My boots crunched softly on the fallen leaves, each step a whisper in the silence. About halfway there, I heard it, a faint rustling behind me. It started subtly, almost blending with the wind. But then I realized it wasn't random. It was deliberate, calculated, and chillingly synchronized with my steps. I stopped. The sound stopped. My pulse quickened, but I told myself it was nothing. A squirrel, maybe. A stray deer. I took a deep breath and pressed on, but the footsteps resumed, matching my pace exactly. Suddenly, I spun around, rifle raised, and flicked on my headlamp. The beam cut through the black, harsh and blinding. For a moment, all I could see was the reflection off my scope, an explosion of light in my eyes. By the time my vision cleared, the woods were silent again, the shadows unbroken. Whoever or whatever had been following me was gone. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to turn back, but pride and curiosity won out. I continued, my grip on the rifle tightening. Minutes later, I caught the faint glow of a flashlight weaving through the trees behind me. The beam bobbed, its movement unsteady, as if held by someone trying to stay quiet. My heart pounded as I crouched, switching off my headlamp and melting into the underbrush. The light drew closer, sweeping the forest floor like a predator searching for prey. I held my breath, my body frozen in the damp earth. Low murmurs followed, two distinct voices exchanging muffled words. The sound was barely audible, but their tone, calm, almost detached, sent a chill through me. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the flashlight beam swung away and vanished. The murmurs faded into the distance. I hurried to my stand, climbing up as quietly as I could, and settled in to wait for dawn. My usual focus on spotting deer was gone, replaced by a gnawing sense of dread. I scanned the woods relentlessly as the first light crept through the trees. Hours passed with no sign of the men or the flashlight. As the sun climbed higher, I began to relax, convincing myself it had all been harmless. Maybe a couple of poachers or hikers who had lost their way. Around midday, I climbed down to check a nearby rub line. The walk was uneventful, and I took my time studying the area before returning to my stand. But as I approached, my stomach dropped. At the base of the tree, right where I'd climbed up that morning, lay a freshly killed rabbit. Its head was severed cleanly, the wound precise and deliberate. Steam still rose faintly from the exposed flesh, mingling with the crisp autumn air. I froze, my eyes darting to the ground around the rabbit. No tracks, not a single footprint in the soft dirt. The forest was deathly quiet. Panic gripped me, and I packed up hastily, abandoning the hunt. The rabbit wasn't just a coincidence. It was a message. But here's the part that still keeps me awake at night. When I returned to my truck and looked back toward the tree line, I saw it. A flashlight beam, flickering once, then twice, before vanishing into the woods. They were still out there, watching, waiting, and whatever they were up to, it wasn't over. When I was about 12 years old, my dad and I embarked on what was supposed to be a memorable hunting trip in the rugged Ouachita Mountains of Arkansas. For days, we had been tracking a large buck, its deep hoofprints etched into the damp soil like a promise of success. Early one crisp morning, as the first light pierced through the dense canopy, we finally caught sight of it. A majestic creature standing at the edge of a clearing. We moved cautiously, staying low and silent as we followed it over a ridge. Eventually, we found cover behind a fallen log, barely daring to breathe as we waited for the buck to wander closer. The forest was alive with the quiet hum of nature, the kind of serene silence that makes you feel like the only people on Earth. Then came the sound that shattered everything. An old battered pickup truck roared down a dirt road not far from where we were hiding. The engine's growl broke the stillness, and the buck, startled, bolted closer to us. My heart raced, but my dad gestured for me to stay calm. At first, we thought the truck would simply pass by. Instead, it screeched to a halt with a jarring crunch of gravel. Before we could process what was happening, gunshots erupted. The first shot zipped past my ear so close I could feel the air shift. I froze in terror, clutching my dad's arm as he pushed me flat against the ground. Another shot struck the log we were hiding behind, sending splinters flying. My dad, his face pale but resolute, raised his bright orange hunting vest above the log, shouting at the top of his lungs, "Stop! There are people here!" The shots didn't stop. 3 more rounds echoed through the forest, each one a horrifying reminder that we were being deliberately targeted. My dad shielded me with his body, his voice firm but tinged with fear as he continued to yell for them to stop. Finally, the truck sped off, its tires spitting dirt and leaves into the air as it disappeared down the road. We sat there for a moment, paralyzed by what had just happened. Then, without a word, my dad grabbed my hand, and we made our way back to the road. His hunting radio crackled to life as he called for the sheriff, his voice steady but filled with an urgency I'd never heard before. Hours later, we learned that the shooter had been caught. Drunk, armed illegally, and with no regard for anyone's safety, he had fired randomly into the woods, oblivious or indifferent to the fact that he could have killed us. For years, I thought that was the end of the story. But 2 decades later, while visiting the area again, I decided to hike back to that spot, driven by a mix of nostalgia and the need for closure. As I approached the clearing, something caught my eye. It was the same fallen log, weathered by time but still there, and stuck deep in the wood, glinting faintly in the afternoon sun, was a bullet. A stark reminder of how close we had come to disaster. But what sent a chill down my spine was what lay next to it, a fresh, empty shell casing. Someone had been there recently. What do you think happened in those woods? Could it have been a coincidence or something more sinister? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one.